fake identities, secret codes, and a burned body found in a remote, desolate valley. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the most baffling, intricate, and honestly downright chilling cold cases in modern European history. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this one because it's a mystery that has frustrated investigators, fascinated amateur sleuths, and inspired massive crowdsourced investigations for over half a century. We've got everything from military espionage to modern forensic breakthroughs, so get comfortable because the rabbit hole we are about to go down is incredibly deep. Okay, let's dive right into this. The year is 1970. We're just outside the city of Bergen, Norway, in a rugged, isolated area known as Ice Valley. Police are called out to a truly horrific scene, the burned corpse of a woman. But, right away they realized this wasn't just a tragic death. It was an actively constructed puzzle. Most of her face and hair had been completely burned away, making any sort of visual identification basically impossible. And then, the investigators noticed something incredibly peculiar. Every single identifying label on her clothing had been painstakingly cut or ripped out. Think about that for a second. Somebody, whether it was her or her killer, went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that this woman remained an absolute ghost. So trying to figure out who she was, the police investigation eventually led them away from that desolate valley and straight to a pair of suitcases left at a local railway station. When investigators cracked those open, well, the contents instantly made this case feel like it was ripped straight out of a Cold War spy thriller. Inside, they found an assortment of wigs, non-prescription glasses clearly used solely to alter her appearance, and even more clothes with every single tag carefully removed. But the absolute most intriguing discovery had to be these notebooks containing meticulously coded logs. Whoever this woman was, she was actively hiding her true self, not just from the people around her, but from history itself. Following the incredibly confusing trail left by those coded notebooks, investigators realized she had been zigzagging all across Norway and Europe, and her timeline, it reveals a dizzying array of aliases. For instance, on March 24th, she checks into the Hotel Bristol in Bergen as Claudia Tilt. By November 9th, she's over in Stavanger at the Hotel St. Sutin, using the name Fenella Lorch. And then just a little over a week later, on November 18th, she's right back in Bergen at the Hotel Rosenkreutz, this time claiming to be a Belgian woman named Elizabeth Lienhauer. At one point, she even told some people she was a South African antique stealer. I mean, she was a total master of reinvention, constantly staying one step ahead. So, we really have to ask ourselves here, who actually operates like this? Was the Isdal Woman a highly trained Cold War spy operating behind enemy lines? Or was she somehow caught up in a dangerous international crime ring? The extreme lengths she went to conceal her identity strongly point to someone involved in high-stakes covert operations. But as you'll see, figuring out exactly what kind of operation she was involved in is where the theories really start to diverge. Let's explore the leading theory first, shall we? To really get a grip on the espionage theory, we have to look at exactly what was happening in Norway back in 1970. At the time, Norway was an absolute hotspot for Cold War espionage. This was largely because of a top-secret military endeavor known as Project Penguin. Run by the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment, this project was dedicated to developing highly advanced anti-ship missiles. Actually, Norway was one of the very first Western countries to develop this kind of technology. It was a complete game-changer in naval warfare. The performance, targeting capabilities, and range of these missiles would have been incredibly valuable, top-tier intel for the Soviet Union, essentially turning Norway's coastlines into a prime hunting ground for foreign agents. Now, what's really interesting here is when you map out the Isdal Woman's intricate travel itinerary, it seems to perfectly mirror the military's testing schedule. A seriously chilling pattern emerges. Investigators noted the striking correlation when comparing her movements with the missile torpedo boats conducting test firings. On March 24th, the missile boats are in Bergen, while so is the Isdal Woman. In April, the testing moves to Stavanger's, she goes to Stavanger. October 29th, new test firings begin back in Stavanger, and she arrives in town right on schedule. And again on November 9th, she seemingly emerges in Stavanger on the exact same day a whole new round of testing begins. And this wasn't just some vague, harmless coincidence either. The paranoia at the Vigdal firing range was incredibly real. Henry Kill Johansen, who was a leader of the Penguin program at the time, explicitly noted this tense atmosphere. He actually stated, "When we shoot, always pop up a Soviet ship. Often there are fishing boat or cargo ships get engine failure just outside the shooting area." He went on to say that it was entirely evident the Russians knew exactly when the test firings would start. The Navy was constantly reporting people being overly curious about the tests, which, as you can imagine, made the presence of our mysterious multi-alias traveler all the more suspicious. However, we have to look at the complete picture fairly here. As modern internet sleuths and researchers have really dug into declassified reports from the Norway Defense Research Establishment, they've found data that challenges this perfect spy timeline. For instance, official missile firing schedules show a very distinct gap in active testing between August of 1970 and January of 1971. Furthermore, there were times when the Isdal Woman was actually out of the country altogether during scheduled tests. Now, some argue she might have been there to meet an insider or maybe monitor preparations rather than the actual firings, but the direct one-to-one correlation between her presence and rockets launching isn't quite as bulletproof as it first appears. But the espionage theory definitely gains some major traction when we look at international comparisons, and this brilliantly illustrates how covert tactics are practically standardized across continents. Take a look at the Isdal Woman in 1970 compared to the famous Somerton Man case in Australia back in 1948. Both victims were found dead under highly mysterious circumstances. Both of them checked their suitcases at train stations, which is a classic getaway tactic, allowing for a quick escape without ever returning to a hotel. Both carried coded logs, and most chillingly of all, both had every single tag meticulously removed from their clothing. It's wild, right? This shared tradecraft strongly suggests some kind of formal intelligence training. Now, if she was a spy, she likely wasn't official embassy staff because counterintelligence would have definitely had her photo on file. That suggests she was a knock agent, operating under non-official cover. But here is the massive paradox with that. Knock agents are trained to blend in perfectly. Their survival literally depends on appearing completely ordinary. Yet the Isdal Woman exhibited incredibly bizarre attention-grabbing behavior. I mean, she famously moved a heavy armchair in and out of her hotel room depending on whether she was inside. And as intelligence experts have pointed out, ripping all the tags out of your clothes is incredibly suspicious if your luggage gets searched at customs. So this points either to surprisingly sloppy tradecraft or to a woman who was in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic, knowing for a fact she was being hunted. For decades, the case basically went ice cold. It was officially written off by Bergen police as a highly unusual suicide. But the mystery just refused to die. Fast forward to 2018, when investigative journalist Mart Hedengraaf from NRK and documentary producer Neil McCarthy from the BBC launched the Death in Ice Valley podcast. This phenomenal piece of journalism didn't just retell the story, it actively reopened the case. They successfully encouraged the Bergen police to take another look and galvanized a massive global community of crowdsourced investigators, bringing the whole case squarely into the digital age. Suddenly, you had thousands of internet sleuths around the world diving into a 50-year-old mystery, combining their diverse skills to uncover clues that had been completely overlooked. Let's move on and see how this builds, because when investigators finally applied 21st century forensics to 1970s evidence, the breakthroughs were absolutely stunning. First off, isotope testing on her teeth and jaw narrowed her birth date to between 1925 and 1930, pinpointing the region right around Nuremberg, Germany. Second, mitochondrial DNA testing revealed she belonged to haplogroup H24. That indicates maternal descent from Romance language country. But despite all of those amazing scientific breakthroughs, many experts, including former intelligence operatives, look at her erratic behavior and argue that there is no way she was a state-sponsored spy. So if we toss out the espionage theory, what exactly is left? Well, the alternative theories suggest she was caught up in something highly illegal and very, very dangerous. Perhaps she was a courier for a stolen art ring traversing Europe. Maybe she was involved in a massive check fraud scheme or high-level blackmail. Some even suggest she was part of an organized crime honey trap. Given that her autopsy showed she had actually been incapacitated with sleeping pills before being burned alive, it strongly implies she crossed paths with ruthless, organized criminals whose patience and ultimately her luck finally ran out. Which really brings us to the ultimate question. We know her approximate age, we know her likely birthplace in pre-war Germany, her bloodline, and the horrifying details of her final days. But we still don't have a name. Will we ever? The general consensus among investigators today is that this giant puzzle will only be solved in one of two ways. Either a familial DNA match is finally made with a living relative, or heavily classified intelligence files are eventually released to the public. Until then, the Isdal Woman remains a haunting phantom out there in Ice Valley. What do you think she was hiding from? The truth is absolutely still out there, just waiting to be found.